Introduction to the nervous system. We're going to look at nerve structures, a brief mention about some of the rules and structures and functions of the nervous system itself, including the parasympathetic and sympathetic systems. So the nervous system can be broken, as we like to do in science, broken into different parts. We have our central nervous system and our peripheral nervous system. Central nervous system, pretty straightforward in terms of parts. The brain itself, incredibly complex, but we've got our brain and we've got our spinal cord. That makes up our central nervous system. The peripheral nervous system, as you'd imagine, this is involving essentially the nerves within our body. And there are the sensory pathways, which essentially take the messages into our central nervous system, and then there's the motor pathways, the response pathways. They take the information out of our central nervous system and take them to the effectors that are going to do the work. Of the peripheral nervous system, we can break that down into the somatic nervous system. And so this is the way, like I'm using right now, to write on things. I say, okay, make my hand do this. So that is my brain telling my hand muscles to move in a particular way. So that would count as the somatic nervous system. However, while I'm doing this, my heart is also beating. I don't have to think about trying to make my heart do that, but my brain is making this possible. And so this is my autonomic nervous system that is doing this. It's controlling, say, the muscles in your stomach and all sorts of things that you do not have awareness as to your control over them. They're involuntary. These can be broken down further. The autonomic nervous system can be broken down further into the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system, which we'll talk about at the end of this. So neural signaling is the communication of nerves. It essentially takes sensory information and uses the afferent neurons to send that message to the interneurons, which is our central nervous system in our brain and in some cases our spinal cord, and then that information is passed along to our efferent neurons, which then can cause some sort of effect. So you have a stimulus picked up from the environment, it could be like even the internal environment of your body. Some sort of sensor is going to pick that up and notice that change and send that signal to the interneurons. Now, interneurons can play back and forth between each other. You can sort of sit there and think about something. That's your interneurons essentially bouncing information around beyond each other. You don't have to actually hear music to think about what the sound would be like. That is your interneurons playing amongst themselves. And again, you don't have to actually, whistle a tune to think about whistling a tune. So again, that is the interneurons all happening there. A lot of complexity within the brain itself. But what it could do is send a signal to an efferent neuron, say something you wanted to whistle or something like that. You could send those messages to your vocal cords and your mouth and everything and get that effect to actually take place. And you see that effector and that action taking place. The neurons themselves are the basic unit of structure of our nervous system. So they are the cells that make up our nervous system. They respond to physical and chemical stimuli itself. They use electrochemical gradients to send a signal along their body, and they're busy sort of doing this. So they sort of rely on these other glial cells to take care of themselves. So they nourish and remove the waste. They essentially take care of the neurons, so the neurons can focus on just sending these messages back and forth amongst each other. The tissues that these nerves come together to form, these neurons come together to form, are called nerves. So you can actually see those structures. The cells that make them up are very, very small, though they could be quite long, but they come together to form these nerves. So in terms of the nerves themselves, we think of cells as being very, very small. A neuron is a cell. The nerves are made up of the neuron cells, but the neurons themselves, they can be really, really long. So for example, say a giraffe itself can have nerve cells that are essentially the length of its body. So it can take those, say from the bottom of its foot and go all the way up to its spine with one single neuron. So you're looking at several meters in length for a single cell. So yes, cells are small, but there are certain ones, like some particular neurons. Even in humans, we have some fairly long neurons in order to be able to send that signal quite quickly. So the structure of a neuron itself, we have sort of the starting part, if you want to think about it, with the dendrites. This is where the signals come in. And so they can come in from other neurons or from other stimuli. And they're going to take that signal and they're going to essentially they're going to put it together and send that signal along the axon of the nerve. That signal is going to end up at the axon terminal, where the next nerve cell, and so here's some dendrites of the next nerve cell over here, And so that's the next nerve cell. And so once the signal gets to the axon terminals, they can actually send the signal across to the next neuron using chemicals. Dendrites themselves, again, they're receiving information, and it's not just like one or two that are connected. We're looking at thousands of connections. So one single neuron will be connected to thousands of other neurons, and then it itself, I mean, again, so they're coming in with lots and lots of different neurons here connected to this one, and then on this end there's going to be lots of connections as well. So a very, very complex system that we don't really fully understand how the integration and communication between them all works, but they are able to send messages between them, and again, the message within the neuron itself is sent through these electrochemical signals. The soma, or the cell body, as we mentioned in the last one there, this is where the signal from the dendrites is sort of brought together. So all those thousands of signals can be essentially brought together and then is sent down the axon as an action potential. These action potentials, essentially the sending of the signal, so in this case we're going this way, this is referred to as the action potential, and it is going to send the signal to the axon terminals, or the terminal buds on the end. The axon itself could be covered in a myelin sheath, and essentially what this allows is it's covered with these Schwann cells that make up this sheath, and the signal is going to be able to jump between the nodes in the gaps in that myelin sheath between those Schwann cells, and that can lead to a faster conduction of the actual signal itself if it doesn't have to travel all the way down the axon, but can in fact jump from one node to the next node of Ranvier, in fact, and if it is able to make the jumps between those nodes, then it'll be able to send the signal faster, and so these myelinated neurons are able to communicate quite quickly. Axon terminals, this is again where the one neuron ends and the next neuron begins, and so the way it sends the signal, that action potential that we'll talk about in another video, that action potential can't go between neurons themselves, and so this gap between the neurons, the synaptic gap, is going to have to be bridged by neurotransmitters, a type of chemical that is released by one neuron into the synapse, and then it is picked up by the next neuron, the postsynaptic neuron, and it is then able to take that message and relay it further down to the next neuron itself. So they travel from one neuron to the other, along them using this action potential that we'll talk about, but between them using these neurotransmitters. A reflex arc is where you have essentially the integration of signals done by not your brain. Your spinal cord itself is able to act as an integrator, so it is able to take signals from sensors, integrate them, so essentially decide what to do with them, and send that information out to some sort of activator. So if you step on something sharp, you don't have to sit there and think about it for a second. Your spinal cord essentially makes the judgment call that we should probably move our foot. Or you touch something hot, again, your brain doesn't have to think about it and make the choice. It will take that signal and it'll say, okay, let's flex those muscles and move that hand away from what's causing danger and damage. So they have the sensory neuron, the receptors, the interneuron, this case is the spinal cord itself, and it is making the decision, and then the motor neuron is causing the action. Finally, we have the two branches of our autonomous nervous system, the part that we're not consciously aware of. There's the parasympathetic and the sympathetic component, and essentially these are sort of antagonistic systems that will change your physiology in a way that is going to hopefully help you out for the given situation. So the parasympathetic is essentially the laying low and relaxing nervous system, and so this is what's going to sort of tell the parts of your body to take it easy. So for example, slowing down a heartbeat, that's something that the parasympathetic nervous system can do. Doing just sort of normal digestion, again, you don't have to sort of tell your digestive system what to do. It is your autonomic nervous system that's doing it, and the parasympathetic nervous system sort of takes care of the regular duties of your body when it is at sort of rest and relaxation. So you can take a look at sort of all the normal things that's going to be happening as you're going about your daily life, like keeping your bladder under control. However, there is this sympathetic nervous system, which is an evolutionary byproduct of having to respond to dangerous situations, essentially. So things like dilating your pupil, not something you have conscious control over. You can change your environment, sort of play with it that way. But your sympathetic nervous system can also cause your eyes to dilate. If you get scared, your eyes will dilate because their sympathetic nervous system will do this as an inherited evolutionary advantage that perhaps having dilated pupils in dangerous situations might be able to help you out. Having a heart rate that is increased when you're frightened, that is your sympathetic nervous system kicking in and saying, okay, if we increase our heart rate, our chance of survival might be better. Dilate the bronchi, getting more air in. Inhibiting digestion, there's no point in digesting your last meal if you might be someone else's next meal. It's releasing glucose into the bloodstream so your muscles can act better and contract faster. Maybe letting go of a little extra weight at a moment may help you get away as well. And so this sympathetic nervous system is what we use, essentially our fight and flight response, in order to help us survive dangerous situations. Our parasympathetic nervous system, this is the one that sort of take it easy and relax, and our normal state, hopefully normal state of being.